We fought over dishes. My fiancée said she needed space and went to her parents. I drove 8 hours to surprise her, found her kissing her ex. My name is Ryan Carter. I'm 28, and for the last 3 years, I've been living with my fiancée, Hannah Blake. We met when she was still in nursing school, and I was already working full-time as a mechanic. From the beginning, our lives had very different rhythms. Her late nights studying and long clinical rotations, my early mornings under the hood of someone's truck. But somehow, the contrast made things interesting. She was the planner, the one with color-coded calendars and grocery lists. I was the guy who winged it, who liked to say yes to last-minute road trips. We balanced each other, at least I thought so. But living together isn't the same as dating. Tiny habits grow teeth. Her way of stacking dishes drove me crazy. My way of tossing laundry into one big basket drove her mad. We argued, but usually those fights fizzled out after an hour. We'd cool down, one of us would make a sarcastic comment, and suddenly we were laughing again. This time was different. It started with dirty plates in the sink. A nothing fight, really. I'd worked a 10-hour shift and came home greasy and exhausted. I grabbed leftovers, ate straight out of the container, and left the plate in the sink, thinking I'd wash it after showering. When I came back, Hannah was standing there, arms crossed, like she'd been waiting for me to notice. She pointed at the sink and said she was tired of feeling like my maid. I snapped back that she wasn't exactly perfect either, that I was tired of her nitpicking. The argument spiraled. Suddenly, it wasn't about dishes at all. It was about how I didn't plan ahead, how she felt she carried more weight in the relationship, how I didn't notice when she was drowning in work stress. I shot back that I was the one paying most of the bills, that she never appreciated what I did to keep our lives steady. Words flew faster, sharper. I regretted them even as they left my mouth, but there was no stopping once we were both cornered. Then Hannah said it. She needed space. At first, I thought she meant a walk around the block, a night apart to cool off. But she meant more than that. She packed an overnight bag, threw in her laptop, a few dresses, and said she was going to her parents' house in Ashford, 8 hours away. Her mom and dad had never really warmed up to me. They were polite but distant, treating me like some temporary phase in Hannah's life. That stung, but I'd swallowed it because I loved her. I tried to argue, to stop her, but she was set. She kissed me quickly on the cheek, the kind of automatic kiss you give someone out of habit, not love, and then she left. The sound of the door closing behind her stayed in my chest like a punch. For the next 2 days, we barely spoke. She texted me once to say she'd made it safely. I replied with a simple good. After that, silence. My pride kept me from reaching out, but my mind wouldn't rest. Every little thing she did before leaving, the rushed packing, the coolness in her tone, the absence of even a backward glance, replayed in my head. By the third night, the silence was unbearable. I told myself I was being stubborn, that if I wanted this relationship to last, I had to be the one to make peace. So I made a plan. I'd drive to Ashford, show up unannounced, and surprise her. I'd bring flowers, maybe her favorite pastry from the bakery near our place, and we'd laugh about how stupid the whole fight was. Maybe her parents would see that I wasn't the careless mechanic they thought I was, but someone willing to fight for their daughter. The idea felt noble, romantic, and for a while, it gave me hope. I set out before dawn, coffee in hand, my old Ford truck humming steady beneath me. The highway stretched for miles, long ribbons of asphalt broken only by gas stations and diners. 8 hours on the road gave me too much time to think. My emotions swung like a pendulum. Guilt for snapping at her, determination to fix things, then flashes of anger that she'd run to her parents instead of talking to me. By the time I crossed into Ashford's county line, my hands were stiff on the wheel. The Blakes lived in a 2-story colonial with white shutters and a perfectly trimmed lawn, the kind of house that looked like it belonged on a holiday card. I pulled into the street just before dusk, parking a few houses down so they wouldn't see me right away. My heart pounded in my chest as I rehearsed what I'd say. Maybe I'd start with an apology, or maybe I'd try humor. Anything to break the ice. I grabbed the bouquet I'd bought at a gas station 2 towns back. It wasn't perfect, the flowers drooped a little, but it was something. With every step toward the house, I told myself this was the right move. That she'd open the door, eyes wide, maybe tear up a little, and we'd hug it out. Then I stopped. I wasn't close enough for them to notice me, but I could see the front porch clearly. Hannah was there, leaning against the railing, her hair pulled back in that loose way she wore it when she was comfortable. She wasn't alone. A man stood with her, close, too close. He had that casual confidence in his posture, leaning in like the space between them had already been erased. I recognized him instantly, even though I hadn't seen him in years. Jason Whitmore, her ex. They were laughing. Easy, familiar laughter, the kind you don't fake. Jason reached out, brushed something from her hair, and she tilted her face toward him. My breath caught as I watched him lean in further. Then it happened. Hannah kissed him back. Not a polite peck, not some accidental brush of lips. A kiss that said everything words wouldn't. The flowers slid from my hand, hitting the sidewalk with a dull thud. For a second, I thought maybe I was hallucinating from exhaustion. 8 hours on the road, barely any food, too much coffee, maybe my mind had cracked. But no, this was real. My fiancée, the woman I was about to marry, was on her parents' porch kissing the man she'd once sworn was part of her past. My first instinct was to storm up and rip them apart, to demand answers, to shout, to let every neighbor in that perfect little street know exactly what kind of woman Hannah was. My fists clenched, the blood roaring in my ears. But something made me stop. Instead, I backed away slowly, retreating into the shadows of a parked SUV. My chest ached with every beat of my heart. My stomach knotted so tight, I thought I'd throw up. I couldn't tear my eyes from the scene, though. Hannah pulled back, said something I couldn't hear, then smiled up at Jason like she hadn't smiled at me in months. That was the moment the reality settled in. Our fight hadn't been about dishes. It hadn't been about me leaving a plate in the sink. It had been about clearing the runway for this. For him. I turned and walked back to my truck, leaving the wilted bouquet on the sidewalk. The drive to Ashford had been fueled by hope, but the drive away from that house was fueled by something darker. Betrayal. And that betrayal wasn't going to disappear with an apology. After leaving Hannah's parents' street, I checked into a budget motel on the outskirts of Ashford. The neon sign buzzed faintly outside my window, flickering on and off like it was mocking me. I lay there fully clothed on the bed, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun in slow circles. My body was exhausted from the 8-hour drive, but my mind refused to rest. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the porch again. Hannah leaning in, Jason's hand brushing her hair, that kiss. The air in the motel room felt heavy, stale, like it hadn't been opened in weeks. I turned the TV on for noise, some late-night rerun I didn't even follow, but nothing dulled the memory. Betrayal has a way of electrifying the brain, like every nerve suddenly tuned to the same frequency. I thought about all the times Hannah had told me Jason was ancient history, how she had rolled her eyes whenever his name came up. Yet there he was, not just in her life, but on her lips. By morning, I was raw. Coffee couldn't cut through the fog in my head, and the greasy diner breakfast I forced down sat like a stone in my stomach. I wanted answers, but more than that, I wanted the truth to be undeniable. If I confronted her too soon, she'd twist it. I'd seen how she could turn her mistakes into my faults with a few carefully chosen words. I needed to see her reaction with my own eyes. So, against every instinct telling me to burn the bridge and never look back, I drove back to her parents' house late that afternoon. The same neat lawn, the same polished windows. Jason's car was gone this time, but Hannah's compact hatchback was still in the driveway. My chest tightened as I pulled up. I walked straight to the front door, my pulse hammering. When Hannah opened it, her expression shifted in waves, surprise, then guilt, then the mask of calm she always wore when she needed control. She asked what I was doing there, as if my appearance was the problem, not what she'd been caught doing. Her parents weren't in sight, though I could hear faint movement deeper in the house. Hannah stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind her. She avoided meeting my eyes at first, fussing with the hem of her sweater. Then she finally looked at me, and it was the face of someone rehearsing excuses. She spoke quickly, her words tumbling over each other, trying to explain that it wasn't what it looked like, that emotions had been high, that Jason was just a friend she'd bumped into. But I had stood on that sidewalk long enough to know it was exactly what it looked like. Her tone shifted when she realized I wasn't buying it. She grew defensive, accusing me of spying, of showing up uninvited, of blowing things out of proportion. That last phrase lodged itself in my chest like a splinter. Blowing things out of proportion, as if the betrayal was small, as if my hurt was exaggerated. Jason, according to her, had been reaching out after years apart, and she had only wanted closure. I nearly laughed at the absurdity. Closure doesn't happen on a porch in the form of kisses. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I simply turned, walked back to my truck, and left her standing there. The way her face froze when I refused to play her game gave me a grim satisfaction. I should have driven home right then. Should have washed my hands of her and let the relationship rot in the past where it belonged. But my chest still burned with the need for certainty. Was it a single slip, or had this been going on longer than I imagined? My gut told me the latter, and I've learned never to ignore my gut. That night, I found myself at a small diner a few blocks from the motel. It was late, the kind of place that smelled like burnt coffee and fried onions, with a jukebox in the corner playing songs that hadn't been popular in decades. I slid into a booth, ordered black coffee, and stared blankly at the menu I had no intention of using. That's when she walked in, a woman in her mid-20s, brown hair tied back, wearing a windbreaker with a faded high school logo on the sleeve. She looked vaguely familiar, though I couldn't place her right away. She spotted me almost instantly, her eyes narrowing like she recognized me too. After a pause, she walked over and asked if I was Ryan. Her name was Kelly Whitmore, Jason's younger sister. The realization hit me like a second blow. Kelly sat across from me without waiting for permission, her expression tight with frustration. She didn't bother with pleasantries. She told me she knew who I was, and she knew what her brother was doing. Then, without ceremony, she dropped the truth I had half suspected but hadn't wanted to admit. Hannah and Jason had been seeing each other for months. According to Kelly, it started around the same time Hannah began visiting Ashford more often, supposedly to spend time with her parents. Kelly had overheard phone calls, noticed her brother sneaking out at odd hours, and finally confronted him. Jason had bragged about it, saying Hannah was miserable in her relationship and that she was only sticking around until she secured her future. The words hit harder than I expected. Hannah wasn't just cheating, she was calculating. Every fight we'd had, every conversation about our future, suddenly looked different under that light. The engagement, the talk about merging finances, her constant pushes for us to expand the business in both our names. All of it might have been less about love and more about leverage. Kelly's voice was sharp, almost angry, but not at me. She was furious with her brother for dragging the family into another mess. Jason had a reputation, it seemed, relationships ending badly, debts unpaid, friendships ruined. Hannah had chosen to reattach herself to someone who left wreckage wherever he went. I listened in silence, my coffee growing cold. The confirmation settled over me like a storm cloud. It wasn't just a kiss on the porch. It wasn't even just an affair. It was a betrayal measured in months, carefully concealed beneath arguments and excuses. The fight about dishes had been a convenient door to slip out of, not a genuine breaking point. Kelly apologized for dropping the weight of this on me, but I told her it was better than staying blind. Her honesty was the first solid ground I'd had since arriving in Ashford. Before leaving, she warned me not to expect Hannah to admit the truth on her own. People like Jason thrived on denial, and Hannah had already proven she was willing to rewrite reality when cornered. I returned to the motel with a new clarity. Anger still burned, but beneath it, something else began to take shape. Resolve. The drive to Ashford had started as an act of reconciliation. I had come with flowers and apologies. Now, those plans were ash in my hands. Hannah had chosen her path. Jason had welcomed her to it. And I wasn't going to beg for scraps of honesty from either of them. Instead, I began to think about what came next. Not in the sense of how to heal or how to forgive, but how to balance the scales. By the time dawn broke again, my mind was no longer clouded. It was sharp, deliberate. I knew that if I played this right, Hannah wouldn't just lose me. She'd lose the foundation she'd been standing on all along. And for the first time since watching that kiss on the porch, I felt something close to calm. Back at the motel, I sat with Kelly's words echoing in my mind. Months of betrayal. Jason bragging about Hannah. The realization that everything I thought I knew about my engagement was nothing more than a facade. The fight about dishes had never been about plates in the sink. It had been a calculated escape route. That knowledge left me with two choices. Walk away quietly, licking my wounds, or make sure Hannah paid the full price of her deceit. I'd never been the type to chase drama, but I'd also never been one to accept being used. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Hannah hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. She'd positioned herself to benefit from me financially. She had been pushing for months to merge accounts, to tie herself into the business I'd built from the ground up. That business, a modest truck repair shop with 3 bays, 2 employees, and a growing reputation, had been my life's work since I was 22. I'd saved every dime, reinvested everything, and finally reached the point where customers drove in from neighboring towns. Hannah had suggested adding her name to the loan papers, argued that it would make us look stronger as a couple, more united in the eyes of banks and vendors. At the time, it had sounded practical, like a natural step toward marriage. Now it was clear. She'd been securing her safety net while rehearsing kisses with her ex on her parents' porch. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. The first step was cutting every financial tie between us. Back home, we shared a savings account where we pooled part of our paychecks for wedding expenses and a future down payment on a house. That account held just under $8,000. I logged in from my laptop and moved my portion into a separate account she didn't know about. The remaining balance, her contributions, I left untouched. I wanted clean separation, no accusations later that I'd stolen what was hers. Next came the apartment lease. We lived in a 2-bedroom place on the edge of town, close to the shop. I'd signed it first, later adding her name at her insistence. That, too, had felt like partnership at the time. Now it looked like entrapment. I called the landlord and explained the situation, asking how to remove myself without penalty. As luck would have it, the lease renewal was due in 2 weeks. All it took was a signed notice, and my obligation would end. I drafted the paperwork that evening. The hardest cut was the wedding arrangements. Hannah had been meticulous in planning. The venue booked, the caterer chosen, deposits already paid. I'd written most of those checks. Canceling meant losing money, but I no longer cared. Better a few thousand lost than decades shackled to someone willing to trade loyalty for convenience. I contacted the venue manager, explained that the engagement was off, and requested termination of the contract. The penalties stung, but hearing the word canceled gave me a grim satisfaction. By the third day, I had dismantled nearly every shared tie between us. Hannah still sent me messages, long paragraphs at first, pleading for me to come back to Ashford and talk. When I didn't answer, the tone shifted. Shorter messages, accusations that I was overreacting, guilt-laced reminders of everything we'd built. I let them pile up, unread. My silence seemed to fuel her desperation. But silence wasn't enough. I needed her to see, plainly and without room for denial, that I knew everything. When I finally returned home, the apartment looked unchanged. Hannah had beaten me back there. Her shoes sat by the door, her jacket slung across the back of a chair. She was in the kitchen when I walked in, moving with the casualness of someone pretending nothing had happened. She turned, smiled tightly, and asked how my trip had been. I didn't answer. Instead, I opened the fridge. On the inside of the door, taped neatly against the plastic shelf, were photographs I'd printed at the motel. Hannah on her parents' porch, Jason leaning in, their lips touching. Alongside the photos was a single sheet of paper with 2 words typed in bold, I know. The color drained from her face when she saw it. She started to speak, but no words came out. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. For once, she had no script, no rehearsed explanation. I closed the fridge slowly, watching her eyes follow the movement like it was a guillotine blade. Then I walked past her into the living room without another word. That night was silent. She stayed in the bedroom. I took the couch. Every few minutes I could hear her shifting, restless, probably drafting the next move in her head. But none of it mattered anymore. The machinery was already in motion. The following days unfolded like a slow burn. Hannah tried every tactic. She cornered me in the hallway, demanded we talk. She left notes on the counter, long, flowing apologies that circled around but never landed on the truth. When apologies failed, she switched to anger, accusing me of betrayal for pulling my money from the joint account, calling me petty for canceling the wedding venue. Her parents even called, voices heavy with practiced disappointment, urging me to be mature and remember that all couples face challenges. What they didn't know, what Hannah hadn't told them, was that the challenge in question was their daughter sneaking around with her ex while using me as financial security. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I let her exhaust herself against the wall of my silence. Each outburst, each attempt at guilt, slid off me like water on stone. The more she flailed, the more I prepared. I began cataloging everything. Screenshots of texts, records of transactions, copies of the lease termination, cancellation receipts from the wedding venue. Evidence wasn't about winning an argument anymore. It was about building a shield. If Hannah tried to twist the story later, I wanted the truth already written in ink. Meanwhile, life at the shop went on. My employees noticed the edge in my demeanor, the way I buried myself in work, but they didn't ask questions. In a way, the steady rhythm of engines and grease was the only thing that kept me sane. Every bolt tightened, every oil change completed, felt like reclaiming control. The moment that cemented everything came one evening when I returned home to find Hannah waiting at the table. She had candles lit, dinner set, an attempt to recreate what we once had. She spoke softly, telling me we could start over, that mistakes didn't have to define us. I let her talk until the words ran dry. Then I stood, opened the fridge again, and pulled one of the photos off the door. I set it on the table between us. Her hands trembled when she picked it up. She stared at the image for a long time, then set it down carefully, as if handling something fragile. Her voice broke as she asked what I wanted from her. That was the moment I realized. I didn't want anything from her. Not apologies, not explanations, not even closure. What I wanted was distance and consequences. So I told her nothing. I left her at the table, her carefully set dinner untouched, and went to bed. The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was the heavy calm before a storm. Because the real consequences were still waiting to arrive, and when they did, they wouldn't come from me alone. The apartment grew colder in spirit over the next week. We lived under the same roof, but might as well have been in separate worlds. Hannah moved quietly, no longer trying to argue, just watching me with calculating eyes, as though waiting for the moment I might cave. What she didn't realize was that I had already cut the rope connecting us. The finances were separated, the lease untangled, the wedding dismantled. All that remained was the final confrontation, the moment she'd have to face not just me, but everyone she'd deceived. That opportunity arrived sooner than expected. Her father called one evening, insisting we all meet at their house. His voice carried the weight of authority, the kind that brooked no refusal. He said too much had been left unsaid, that Hannah was beside herself and needed resolution. I agreed, though not for the reason he imagined. The drive back to Ashford felt different this time. The first trip had been driven by hope, the second by pain. This one was fueled by a cold determination. I wasn't walking into an ambush of words. I was walking into a courtroom, and I had brought the evidence. Their home looked just as perfect as before, the kind of place built to impress neighbors. Hannah's mother opened the door, polite but stiff, ushering me into the living room where Hannah already sat. Her father stood by the mantel, hands clasped behind his back. The air was thick with tension. Hannah avoided my eyes, staring at the carpet as though memorizing the pattern. The conversation started predictably. Her father spoke about commitment, about how every relationship faced trials, about forgiveness being the cornerstone of marriage. He leaned on phrases that sounded rehearsed, the same kind of rhetoric he probably used in church committees or community meetings. Hannah's mother added her soft urgings, asking me to think of the future, of the life Hannah and I had built together. I let them speak. I let Hannah finally lift her gaze and murmur that she had made mistakes, but loved me deeply. It was the performance of a woman trying to steer the narrative, and under different circumstances, it might have worked. But not this time. When the room finally went quiet, I opened the folder I'd brought. Inside were the photographs from the porch, printed in clear detail. The copies of text messages where Hannah had shifted blame, never once admitting the truth. The receipts from the canceled wedding, the lease termination, the account separation. I laid each piece on the coffee table one by one, like evidence in front of a jury. Hannah's face drained of color. Her mother's lips parted in disbelief, her hand trembling as she picked up a photo. Her father's jaw clenched, eyes flicking from the images to his daughter with a mixture of anger and disappointment. The silence was thick, suffocating, until the sound of a door opening broke it. Jason walked in. I hadn't expected that. But there he was, casual in jeans and a leather jacket, walking into the lion's den as if summoned. His confidence faltered when he saw the photographs on the table. Behind him stood Kelly, her face set with determination. She had dragged him here, forced him into the confrontation he had avoided. Jason tried to laugh it off, muttering something about misunderstandings, but Kelly cut him short. She spoke clearly, telling her parents, and mine by extension, that Hannah and Jason had been meeting for months. She described overhearing calls, watching him sneak around, and how he had bragged about it. The truth poured out in undeniable detail, leaving no room for Hannah's carefully crafted performance. The room erupted. Hannah's father turned on Jason, his voice rising in fury. Her mother wept quietly, clutching the photographs like they burned her hands. Hannah herself sat frozen, eyes wide, lips parted in shock that her secret ally had betrayed her publicly. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. When the chaos reached its peak, I spoke calmly, cutting through the noise. I explained that the engagement was over, that the wedding was canceled, that Hannah had no claim to me or my business or my future. I told them I had removed myself from every shared tie. There was nothing left to fight over. Then I stood, leaving the folder on the table for them to sift through like ashes. Hannah tried to follow me, reaching out with trembling hands, but I stepped back. For the first time, I saw her desperation not as love but as fear. Fear of losing the stability she had carefully engineered. Fear of facing her family's disappointment without the shield of our engagement. I walked out, the sound of her pleading voice muffled by the closing door. The aftermath unfolded quickly. Word spread through Ashford faster than wildfire. Kelly, fed up with her brother's arrogance, posted her side of the story on social media. The photographs circulated quietly among locals, enough to stain reputations without ever making it to tabloids. Jason became a pariah in his own circles, his usual charm overshadowed by the scandal. He eventually left town, slipping away without fanfare. Hannah faced a different fallout. Her nursing job, once her pride, became unbearable. Co-workers whispered, patients' families gave her wary looks, and the shame gnawed at her. Within months, she transferred to a smaller clinic on the edge of the county, taking night shifts nobody else wanted. The life she had envisioned, the marriage, the financial security, the stability, collapsed around her. As for me, I threw myself into the shop. Free from the weight of her manipulations, I expanded operations, bought out the neighboring lease, and hired another employee. Business thrived, word of mouth spreading that I was reliable, steady, and unwilling to cut corners. Every now and then, I'd catch wind of Hannah's struggles through mutual acquaintances. Stories of her trying to start over, of her strained relationship with her parents, of the bitterness that followed her like a shadow. I didn't gloat. I didn't seek her out. Her downfall was hers to live with. What mattered was that I had walked away intact, my work and my dignity preserved. She had gambled on deceit, and the cost had come due. The memory of that kiss on the porch never fully left me, but over time, it stopped burning. It became a scar instead of an open wound, a reminder of what I'd survived and what I'd refused to accept. In the end, Hannah lost more than just a fiancé. She lost the future she had tried to engineer at my expense. And Jason lost the last thread of credibility he had in his own family. All I lost was an illusion, and that was the best trade I could have made. And that's the story. If you're still here, that means you're one of us. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button. I drop new chaos every single day, and trust me, tomorrow's story, it's even worse than this one.